Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving right into a seriously fascinating academic exploration. We're going to unpack one of the most complex, constantly shifting dynamics in modern history, the relationship between the American citizen and the government. We're going to look closely at the structural inequalities originally built into the American system, the ongoing evolution of civil rights, and honestly, just how fragile our societal agreements really are.
To really wrap our heads around this, let's start with a profound thought from Martin Luther King Jr. taken from his famous letter from a Birmingham jail. He points out this massive inherent tension between two ideas, order and justice. And this distinction right here, this is going to be our main lens for today. Think about it. How often does the state prioritize maintaining the status quo, keeping order, over doing what is fundamentally right or pursuing justice? Keep that question in the back of your mind as we go.
So here is our roadmap for this deep dive. We'll hit 1. The fragile social contract. 2. Foundations of elite power. 3. The struggle for inclusion. 4. Protecting the vulnerable. 5. Order over justice. And 6. An unfinished American work. Let's jump into Section 1. The fragile social contract. American ideals versus systemic realities. To truly understand the American system, we have to contrast the grand, stated ideals of the Republic with the actual lived reality of its structures. Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address brilliantly captures that philosophical ideal we're always striving for. He famously declared that the nation was conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. It's an incredibly beautiful sentiment, right? It promises a social contract where every single citizen stands on equal footing. But an ideal is really just a starting point. Let's look at how the government was actually built to execute that ideal.
That brings us to Section 2, Foundations of Elite Power, Designing a Republic, not a Democracy.
We have to go back to the foundational era, when the delegates gathered at the 1787 Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia. They were actually deeply concerned about what they called unrestrained democracies. James Madison literally viewed pure democracies as spectacles of turbulence. So they explicitly designed a republic. The idea was that the voice of the people would be filtered through representative institutions, largely as a way to maintain economic and social order. Think about who was actually doing the designing. If we look at the demographics of those 55 delegates, they were 100% white, nearly half were lawyers, 31% were slave owners, and over 87% came from the middle or wealthy classes. This totally highlights how the foundational structures of the American government were designed by and initially protected a highly specific elite class. They systematically excluded women, minorities, and the poor from that original social contract. So how did they structure representation to buffer that elite power from the masses? Well, the Constitution initially left only the House of Representatives subject to a direct popular vote. The Senate, that was to be chosen by state legislatures. The presidency filtered through the Electoral College, which, by the way, is a system that still gives outsized voting power to smaller states today. This buffering of elite power was baked in even further through federalism. Unlike a unitary system where the national government has all the sovereignty, federalism splits the power between the national and state governments, and that created a really complex web of authority. Historically, as you'll see, this division has been used in two very different ways, both to expand civil rights from the top down and to violently suppress them at the state level. Moving right along to Section 3, the struggle for inclusion, the antithesis to elite rule. Because the system was built by and for a select few, the story of American democracy is essentially this massive, ongoing struggle by marginalized groups to overcome systemic disenfranchisement. The evolution of voting rights is a perfect example of this historical push and pull. After the Civil War, the 15th Amendment prohibited denying the vote based on race. But almost immediately, state governments prioritized their own exclusionary order. They concocted literacy tests and poll taxes specifically to disenfranchise Black Americans. It actually took until the 1965 Voting Rights Act to strike those down. And that struggle hasn't stopped. Today, we see fierce debates over strict voter ID laws. Critics argue these laws disproportionately affect poor and minority voters, while proponents argue they're absolutely crucial to prevent fraud. And the barriers aren't just at the ballot box, they're quite literally drawn into the maps. Gerrymandering allows state legislatures to manipulate electoral boundaries, packing districts to basically guarantee victory for a specific political party. The result of this? Today, a staggering 85% of House seats are uncompetitive. It's a modern structural barrier where, effectively, politicians get to choose their voters rather than the voters choosing their politicians. Which brings us right back to Dr. King's writings from the Birmingham jail. When the state apparatus is rigged to maintain the status quo, getting included in that system requires immense pressure. King argued that unjust laws, meaning laws that a majority forces a minority to obey but doesn't make binding on itself, must be broken openly and lovingly to wake up the conscience of the community. As he noted, justice is never voluntarily given.
This takes us to Section 4, Protecting the Vulnerable, the State's Evolving Contract.
When the oppressed do demand their freedom, the social contract does occasionally evolve. We see it expand to include legal protections for the physically and economically vulnerable. A prime example is the Americans with Disabilities Act, or the ADA. This was a monumental civil rights milestone. It fundamentally shifted the burden onto society and onto employers to accommodate individuals with physical or mental limitations, ensuring they have the exact same rights and opportunities as everyone else in public life.
But it's fascinating to see how the state balances this contract. The ADA requires employers to provide reasonable accommodation to a qualified employee. However, this is legally weighed against something called undue hardship, meaning the accommodation can't be overwhelmingly difficult or expensive given that specific employer's financial resources. So it's this constant, delicate legal tightrope between honoring an individual's human rights and acknowledging strict economic realities.
And yet, some vulnerable populations still remain tragically unprotected. Consider the invisible crisis of elder abuse. As our sources highlight, this takes so many forms: financial exploitation, physical abuse, emotional manipulation, and even self-neglect. Now, that might sound like a high-level sociological issue, but at its core, it is the devastating reality of a population slowly being stripped of its dignity and basic human rights, and sadly often by their own families or caregivers.
Just to put a vivid, honestly terrifying scale to this, look at this number: $750,000. That's the estimated amount involved in just one single FBI investigation into the financial exploitation of a senior citizen suffering from early Alzheimer's. Their assets were entirely drained to fund illegal activities. When the state fails to protect its elders, the social contract completely breaks down, leaving our most vulnerable citizens effectively prisoners in their own homes.
Which leads us to Section 5, Order over Justice, State Overreach, and Human Rights. So, what actually happens when the state apparatus, usually facing some kind of crisis, completely prioritizes security and order over fundamental justice and human rights? Well, in the aftermath of 9/11, the U.S. government utilized enhanced interrogation techniques at secret CIA prisons. James Mitchell, a psychologist and one of the architects of the program, neutrally described his view of waterboarding. As you can see, he and the Justice Department at the time argued that these techniques were designed to be uncomfortable and distressing, but caused no lasting long-term harm. The argument was simply that it was a necessary measure for national security.
But juxtapose that clinical assessment with the actual human reality. A former detainee described severe, ongoing PTSD, saying the horror comes to him in his sleep, leaving him feeling shackled all over again. This stark contrast perfectly highlights the profound human cost of state-sanctioned trauma. When the government decides that the order of national security supersedes the justice of basic human rights, the moral standing of the state is deeply, deeply compromised.
Finally, Section 6, An Unfinished American Work, the Ongoing Experiment. As we've seen today, the American system was never a static, perfect creation. It's a living, breathing, and yes, often deeply flawed experiment. The relationship between the American citizen and the state remains an unresolved, continuous struggle. From the elite framers in Philadelphia, to the civil rights marchers in Birmingham, to the disabled workforce, to the elders in our communities, the fight for a fair social contract is never just over. So I'm going to leave you with this to reflect on. When the state inevitably prioritizes order over justice, how can you, the modern citizen, ensure that the social contract actually remains intact? Thank you so much for exploring this with me today.